With COVID-19, we can see the weakness of our system at almost every level. What did Trump's tax cuts do for me and you again? What was the impact of the lowest unemployment rate in history, which was around 3.5% back in December of 2019?
And what job numbers we had today. Did you hear? Did you hear? Well, we'll go into that. They all say, speak about the economy, speak about the economy. Well, we have the greatest economy in the history of our country. But sometimes it's not as exciting to talk about the economy, right? Because we have a lot of other things to talk about. Also, very important, the economy is unbelievable. This election will decide whether we build on the extraordinary prosperity that we've unleashed. Nobody can believe what's happened. Or whether we let the radical Democrats take control of Congress and take a giant wrecking ball to our economy and to our future. America now has the best economy in the history of our country, and we want to keep it that way. The Democrats, and it could happen, could happen. We're doing very well, and we're doing really well in the Senate, but could happen. And you know what you do? My whole life. You know what I say? Don't worry about it. I'll just figure it out. Does that make sense? I'll just figure it out.
Oh, really? Are you figuring it out now? Are you? Well, now we know that this was always the big lie, a farce, that has become almost like following of market worshiping. The quantity of these jobs and the booming economy would never amount to nothing more than living from paycheck to paycheck for the corporation's benefit and just good talking points for people like Trump.
It's the National Multifamily Housing Council and also real estate data providers. Nearly 1/3 of renters in the United States were unable to pay their rent the first week of April. That's down. It was something like 69% paid their rent compared to 81% in the first week of March and 82% in April of 2019. Let's discuss what this means, and as we go forward, I want to bring in the panel. We've got Julia LaRoche, we've got Akiko Fujita, and also Julie Hyman. Julie, what jumps out at you about this?
Well, there are a lot of questions around these numbers because we have had certain municipalities, right, that have said they are not going to initiate any eviction proceedings at this time. That's true of New York City, but it's not universal. So it's not clear now whether this will have a ripple effect and affect some families. Keep in mind, there are a lot of other numbers, right, to consider as we're talking about all of this housing data. We got mortgage applications this morning that fell by nearly 18%. So we know people are not looking at buying homes right now, which is not surprising. We also learned over the past couple of days that there has been a 2,000% surge in the number of people asking for forbearance on their mortgages. In other words, asking not to have to pay their mortgages right now.
On Friday, frustrated and struggling American citizens took to the streets across the country in rent strikes as bills come due and families are facing really hard choices. ABC's Will Carr is right there in Santa Monica, California with that story. Will, good morning to you.
And Dan, before this crisis, a lot of Americans were living paycheck to paycheck. Some were spending more than half of their take home on rent alone. Now that they're stuck at home and don't know when they'll get back to work, they've got some tough choices to make. This weekend, many Americans are struggling to count their dollars. Gabby Nam is a cook who recently lost her job at a Brooklyn restaurant.
I'll be able to make rent next month, but after that, if unemployment doesn't kick in, then I'm definitely in trouble.
More than 30 million Americans have filed for unemployment since mid-March, leading to long lines snaking into food banks from coast to coast. And rent strikes across the country, too. From New York to Los Angeles.
I'm still left with the same choice of either I pay the rent and I'm left without nothing, no money for food or other essential goods.
Renters aren't the only ones struggling. Landlords like Daryl Marshak have bills to pay, too.
Maybe I got 2 months total of my mortgage if I have to come up with it myself. Not to mention water, power, sewage, gardener.
Across the country, there are patchwork policies for housing protection, creating widespread confusion.
What we're doing is no one can be evicted for non-payment of rent between now and June, period.
But according to Princeton University, 8 states have not suspended evictions or foreclosures during the pandemic.
We need a uniform national moratorium on evictions and on foreclosures. We're urging no less than $100 billion in rental assistance to ensure the housing stability of the country's lowest income renters during this crisis.
One missed paycheck, and immediately 30% of Americans can't pay their rent in the first week of April? Are these stable jobs? Or are these just poverty wages? This has never been the strongest economy, because a strong economy shouldn't be proved up by averages by our leaders. GDP growth, employment numbers. These macroeconomic indicators are limited and are not representative of an individual's or American's financial health. We need to watch how people are doing on the ground in a standard, repeated, holistic way, not just by looking at averages. For example, liquid personal savings has been emerging as a critical factor in households' financial health. And maybe if we would be talking about those numbers, the conversation wouldn't be as bright. And going off topic a little bit, what happens at home does have an impact on American leadership abroad.
The COVID-19 pandemic could increase China's financial influence.
China is now sharing its experience with the rest of the world and providing much-needed supplies.
30 tons of equipment to Italy, 500,000 surgical masks to Spain.
Following the outbreak in Wuhan, China has positioned itself as a global leader, containing the outbreak, agreeing to deals to suspend repayment of some of its loans, and charging ahead with vaccine development.
The COVID crisis, at least so far, has cast a negative shadow on the capacity for leadership of America. It did not try or even show interest in marshalling a global response to this crisis.
It's going to disappear. One day it's like a miracle, it will disappear.
This could offer an opportunity for China because it's tried to fill the vacuum that America has left in terms of global leadership.
China's tough response to the crisis and the growing size and depth of its financial markets have helped convince investors it's a safe bet, even as COVID sent other markets crashing. While emerging markets saw the value of bonds plummet earlier this year, China's government bonds remained stable, which is a good gauge of trust in a country's economy.
So China has the second biggest bond market in the world. COVID provided the first tests that this bond market could resist a crisis in a way that typically emerging market bonds don't. It shows investors trust China as an economy that they don't think it's going to collapse overnight.
So we've been hearing about these protesters even here in Chicago, with their Confederate flags, Nazi signs that have appeared at the doors to Auschwitz, and all you could hear is me, 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 me. I want to go bowling. I need a haircut. I want a burger. USA.
People can protect themselves. They don't need to be protected from each other. As the weather gets warmer, I have a real concern that things are going to escalate significantly because people are losing real money.
But I don't think right now is the time to do that. Right now we have a lot of patients who are sick in the hospital, who are dying. Eventually that's what we want, but I don't think it's the right time to do that.
I'm following the COVID cases every single day. Pritzker is using a broad brush over the entire state, and it is wrong. Small businesses are going under. This virus is not going away. It's not going away. So everything that Pritzker has done is not going to get rid of the virus.
How did they come up with this number of 6 feet? I think they just pulled it out of their rear ends. Maybe it's 5, maybe it's 3.5, maybe it's 8, I don't know. But why 6?
Do your job! 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 Do your job!
We have to ask, why is it that suddenly some Americans are so ramped up to open up the economy? Well, let's see who's really dying. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, published that data is still emerging, but it suggests that there's a disproportionate burden of illness and death among racial and ethnic minority groups. In Chicago, in our own city, 70 of our city's first 100 recorded victims of COVID-19 were Black.
Dr. Kwame Fouché is a health insurance medical director.
In these communities, the health insurance is
not adequate.
He says that results in many blacks with pre-health conditions like diabetes, high blood pressure, and hypertension never seeing a doctor until they are seriously ill. Fouché adds their living conditions often make social distancing impossible.
And you tell people to stay at home, don't go outside. That hits them a lot harder than someone who has a lot more space to work with.
The disparities in healthcare won't change overnight, but experts believe they can combat COVID-19, especially if young black adults understand no one is immune.
There are young people on ventilators right now.
Now, Dr. Fouché adds that while drive-through testing sites like this one here at Roseland Hospital are useful, they still place limitations on many in the community because not everyone has a vehicle.
Look like states such as Illinois. That's a state where the African American population is 14%, but the number of African Americans who have died from the virus is 40%. So there really is a sense that this is alarming data, and we're really just seeing the tip of the iceberg.
And we're starting to hear experts talk about this and try to explain and understand why it is happening. What are some of the factors, Lindsay?
There's a couple of key factors, and they're linked together, Heather. That would be health and economics. This was in the White House coronavirus briefing yesterday. Dr. Fauci said that part of the reason why this is happening is because of pre-existing conditions that are present in the African American community. Here's what he had to say.
When you look at the predisposing conditions that lead to a bad outcome with coronavirus, the things that get people into ICUs that require intubation and often lead to death, they are just those very comorbidities that are unfortunately disproportionately prevalent in the African American population. So we're very concerned about that. It's very sad.
Now, the other factor is economics, because there was a recent study that shows that people of color in the United States are less likely to have the kind of white-collar jobs that would allow them to work from home, and more likely to be the kinds of frontline workers that we're seeing in grocery stores, people that have to go to work. And those jobs are less likely to have comprehensive health insurance with them. Here's how one economist from Ohio State University put it.
This is where issues such as racial wealth and income inequality really come to the fore. African Americans don't have, on average, the type of cushion that allow them to weather these sorts of economic catastrophes. They just do not.
So alarming, and certainly there are a number of states, a number of organizations, a number of people who are really calling for more data so that there can be a fuller understanding of just how at risk these communities of color truly are.
The elderly too. The New York Times reported that deaths in long-term care facilities account for more than a third of this country's pandemic fatalities from the current data. It was an emergency until the elites found out who's dying.
As far as the task force, Mike Pence and the task force have done a great job, but we're now looking at a little bit of a different form, and that form is safety and opening, and we'll have a different group probably set up for that.
Are you saying mission accomplished?
No, not at all. The mission accomplished is when it's over. Well, because we can't keep our country closed for the next 5 years. You know, you could say there might be a recurrence, and there might be, and most doctors or some doctors say that it will happen, and it'll be a flame, and we're going to put the flame out. I'm not saying anything is perfect, and yes, will some people be affected? Yes. Will some people be affected badly? Yes. But we have to get our country open, and we have to get it open soon.
Today, President Trump egged on protesters in 3 states who are defying restrictions and demanding an end to stay-at-home orders. But each of those states is following guidelines from the president's own task force. And tonight, the governor of Washington state says the president may be inciting violence. Ben Tracy is at the White House tonight. Ben?
Nora, just 24 hours ago, President Trump said governors would call the shots when it comes to reopening their states and that he would support them. Well, the president is already breaking that promise.
Protesters calling themselves Liberate Minnesota demanded Governor Tim Walz lift the state's stay-at-home order, despite a still rising number of COVID cases. Protesters in several states now have a powerful advocate President Trump, who sent a series of tweets this morning to liberate Minnesota, Michigan, and Virginia, all states with popular Democratic governors.
If I thought we could go back to work tomorrow, that's exactly what we would do.
Lifting stay-at-home orders in any of these states would violate the president's own guidelines unveiled yesterday. Mr. Trump was asked if protesters should listen to him or their governors.
I think they're listening. I think they listen to me. They seem to be protesters that like me and respect this opinion.
Are you concerned, though, that people coming out in protest are going to spread COVID to other people? They're congregating in ways that health experts have said they should not.
No, these are people expressing their views. I see where they are and I see the way they're working. They seem to be very responsible people to me. But it's, they've been treated a little bit rough.
I would like to know about some of these areas that you would like to open up, some of these quadrants. You singled out Virginia, Michigan. They don't have a decline in cases yet. Yet you tweeted out today that you'd like to liberate them.
Well, they're going to have soon, but they're very, very, what they've done is very powerful in terms of, I think, you could get the same result out of doing a little bit less. What they've done to some people is very unfair. If you take a look at what's going on in Virginia, they want to take away Second Amendment rights, and that's what they want to do. So when you talk about liberate, or if you talk about a liberation, you could certainly look at Virginia.
From the sound of it, we got to open up the country because it doesn't affect the regular folks, right? The lives of workers at the front lines of the pandemic, such as meat packers, transportation workers, and grocery clerks, who also happen to be disproportionately African American and Latino, have been deemed so worthless that even unionize their employers, even as they force them to work under unsafe conditions, they all want these people to get back to work. Think about that.
Executive order signed by President Trump declares meat processing plants as critical infrastructure. That ensures that facilities remain open to prevent any shortages in the meat supply throughout the country. In our area, that means a return to operations at the Smithfield plant in St. Charles. It was ordered to shut down by the Kane County Health Department last week due to an outbreak of COVID-19 among an undisclosed number of workers. Many meat plants across the country have been coronavirus hotspots. There have been numerous shutdowns, at least 20 deaths, and hundreds of workers out sick. While processors are highlighting new protocols, including health screenings and operational changes, many workers are still afraid to return.
They told me that everything was okay, and they told me I'll have a better chance catching the coronavirus going out to Walmart than in Tyson. Come to work, you safe.
Limited plant closures have already impacted a massive supply chain for beef, chicken, pork, and other products, which has had a ripple effect on other industries and consumer prices. The presidential order protects processors from liability should workers become sick, and that has outraged unions. And the AFL-CIO has called the order dangerous and wrong.
Just in terms of the order to reopen, how concerned are you about worker safety?
Well, we were dismayed by the order. We think that the administration is taking the wrong approach. Our members are getting sick and they're dying. And I think that if the administration wants to protect the food chain, what they really need to do is to protect the health and safety of the workers in that industry. Right now, they're doing the wrong thing. They have not required safety procedures. They have only provided voluntary guidance for employers. And that is not going to help. We need to make sure people are safe. And when plants were closing down, they were closing down for deep cleaning and to protect lives so that the plants could continue operating.
If Trump's base will be dying, maybe, just maybe, Trump would be thinking twice about opening up the economy as rapidly as he's pushing it for. Maybe he could open up to more welfare for his base, just the way he did when he was subsidizing farmers that were impacted by self-imposed tariff wars with China.
Our money lead now. President Trump just moments ago touted a $16 billion taxpayer-funded bailout for farmers hurt by the escalating trade war with China, and specifically Chinese tariffs against American agricultural products. President Trump claims that Beijing will foot the bill for the bailout through the tariffs imposed on Chinese goods, but that's simply not accurate. Tariffs don't get paid into the U.S. Treasury. American consumers are the ones bearing the brunt of increased prices on Chinese imports to the U.S. So Americans, in some ways, are now being hit twice as hard.
What do you think of the trade war with China that the administration is taking?
I think he's crazy. I think he's nuts. He's lost his cork.
Yeah. Would you say you're frustrated?
Oh, absolutely. We're all frustrated. Yeah.
For MFP?
I guess that's what it is, yeah.
You applied for these payments. Tell me what led you to do that, what you think of it.
Yeah, I did apply for the market facilitation payment. The payments themselves are, if you will, compensation for the losses that we've received or haven't received for the normal, if you will, trade relation, transactions that we would have had with China.
You applied for payments?
I did, yes. Yep.
Why?
I can't afford not to. Survival, I got to pay bills.
It's a difficult payment to take. I guess, I understand that, it's going to increase the federal budget. I get that.
It's difficult for a lot of us. I would say most of us would much rather have positive trade news that resulted in markets that were able to keep us sustainable and continue to operate.
Instead of
taking payments from the government.
Where do you see this trade war stand, and how does that impact you and your operation?
I think in January, Vaughn, I was very hopeful that it was going to be short-lived. There was negotiations that was ongoing. Since that point in time, we've seen negotiations start, stop. It's been the name of the game.
A majority of farmers, whatever percentage that might be, I think supported Trump when he said that he was going to take on China. We all know as a farm community that China's been taking advantage of us in the world of trade for a long time. Market manipulation, several things. It's hard to not have a sense of rah-rah when you hear somebody that's going to do that. I think the hindsight of all this is we think and wish it would have been handled in a different way without the use of food as a weapon in this trade war.
You don't want assistance, right? You want markets, don't you?
Ideally, we would love to have markets, right? Exports is what we're good at, and that's what we want. We'd love to see resolution to the trade war.
Because China plans to impose retaliatory tariffs on American goods, including soybean-related products, Hultin will plant only corn this year.
What would you tell the president if you were standing right here?
I'd tell him that, we've supported him from the get-go on trying to bring China to the table and make them more accountable for their practices, but every day that this ticks on, farmers are the ones that are taking it on the jaw.
How long is this going to go on before you say, hey, this is too much, you're ruining us out here?
I think to a point you could say we're already there. We appreciate the support he's given farmers. Farm bankruptcies are up all over, and we're just not in an economy that can handle this stress much longer.
Well, according to a study by Brookings William Frey, found that the COVID-19 disease is becoming an increasingly suburban and rural problem. So just watch how quickly his stance will change once it starts affecting the rugged folks, if he still cares.